Welcome to our deep dive into the world of Sir Isaac Newton. We're going to uncover the man behind the myth, the apple, the gravity, all of that.
It's true that the Apple story is a big one for people, but I think what we often overlook is just how broad his intellectual interests really were. Newton wasn't just a physicist or a mathematician. He was a true polymath. He really went into everything from optics and astronomy to alchemy and even biblical chronology.
So we're not just talking about like some boring old scientist, right? This guy had range. But before we get into like the details of all of his discoveries, let's rewind a bit and talk about his early life, like the origin story of a genius.
Yeah, well, you might be surprised to learn that Newton's early academic career wasn't exactly stellar. In fact, he was, kind of an average student for a good chunk of his childhood.
Really?
Oh.
Huh. That's kind of reassuring, actually. So even Sir Isaac Newton had to work for it. I guess even geniuses have to start somewhere.
Absolutely. And it's important to keep in mind the context of his childhood, too. He was born premature, his father died before he was even born, and he was mostly raised by his grandmother after his mother remarried. So these early experiences definitely shaped his personality and his drive to succeed.
It makes you wonder if those early challenges actually pushed him even harder.
Yeah.
It's almost like he had something to prove.
Yeah, it's a good point.
But how did he go from an unremarkable student to becoming, well, the Isaac Newton?
Well, there's a pretty interesting turning point. A bully at school, kind of ironic, became like the spark for his intellectual awakening. He was determined to be better than this bully academically, and that competitive spirit, that really sparked a passion for learning that never really left him.
So it wasn't just like a love of learning, but it was also a bit of a rivalry that got him going. It's like the ultimate I'll show you story, except the outcome was, changing the world of science.
Yeah.
But let's get back to that apple. Was it really a eureka moment, or is it just a good story?
The Apple story is, I think it's more of an analogy than like a literal event. It's not likely that an apple actually hit him on the head. But seeing an apple fall, that's what sparked a really profound question in his mind. Why do objects fall straight down?
It's such a simple question. I guess sometimes the biggest breakthroughs come from those really basic questions, Like he looked at something we all see every day and thought, but why?
Exactly. And that why, that led him to develop his theory of universal gravitation, which, is how every object in the universe attracts every other object.
Oh, so from apples to the entire universe. But hold on, how did he actually figure that out? Did he just sit under a tree and think until it came to him?
It wasn't quite that simple. Newton's genius was his ability to combine observation, experimentation, and math. He didn't just watch an apple fall. He studied the movement of the moon, the planets, and, the stars, trying to find like a connection that could explain how they all moved.
So he was kind of like a detective, putting together the clues from space. I'm starting to get why he's considered such a big deal in science. But we've talked a lot about gravity. Didn't he do a lot with light, too?
Oh, absolutely. His experiments with prisms changed how we understand light and color.
Okay, remind me about those prisms. I vaguely remember them from high school science class, but it's a little fuzzy.
Okay, so picture this. You have a beam of sunlight passing through a prism. What do you see?
Well, I know that it makes a rainbow, but I'm guessing there's more to it than that.
You're right. Before Newton, people thought that prisms, that they like added color to white light. But Newton proved that white light is actually already a mixture of all the colors of the rainbow, and the prism just separates them, like bending each color a little differently.
Oh, so the colors were always there, hiding in plain sight. It's like the prism is decoding the light and showing all the hidden colors.
That's a great way to put it. And this discovery, it wasn't just pretty to look at. It had big implications. It led to spectroscopy, which is how we analyze the light from stars and galaxies, so it gives us information about the universe.
Wow, it's amazing that something as simple as a prism can help us learn about space.
And that's just like the beginning when it comes to Newton's impact on science. His work is the foundation of modern physics and math, and it's still used today in things like engineering, computer science, and even space exploration.
Wait, space exploration? So you're saying that the stuff we're doing now with rockets and satellites is all thanks to a guy from like hundreds of years ago?
Pretty much. His laws of motion, which he developed while working on gravity, are still how we calculate the paths of spacecraft. And they're used to design like everything from planes to bridges.
No way. This guy was really ahead of his time. But I've heard he wasn't exactly known for being easygoing. Like, weren't there some pretty big arguments in the science world? Did he really fight over who invented calculus?
Well, let's just say Newton was passionate about his work. And he was very protective of his ideas. And that passion sometimes, it led to some heated debates, especially with Gottfried Leibniz over calculus.
So you're saying like two geniuses going head to head. That sounds pretty dramatic.
It was a long and kind of bitter rivalry, a lot of accusations being thrown around. But, both of these guys independently developed calculus, but they had totally different ways of doing it and writing it. The whole controversy ended up hurting both of their reputations, but it also shows how competitive science can be and that innovation, it's not always pretty.
So even geniuses can get caught up in drama. It makes them seem more human, honestly.
Exactly. It just shows that science is a human endeavor driven by passion and ambition. And sometimes, yeah, a little rivalry. But at the end of the day, it's the search for knowledge and understanding that pushes things forward. And in that search, Newton was a true pioneer.
Well, we've covered a lot, from falling apples to math battles. But there's still more to learn about this guy.
Definitely. When we come back, we're going to take a deeper look at his personality, explore some of his, lesser-known interests, and discover how his work is still shaping our world, even now, in the 21st century.
Welcome back to our deep dive on Sir Isaac Newton. Before the break, we were talking about his rivalry with Leibniz over calculus. It really shows how even the brightest minds can get caught up in competition. But even with all the drama, his work is still so important. We're still using his laws of motion today to launch rockets.
It really shows how powerful his ideas were. And it's amazing that his influence goes beyond the science that even existed during his time.
Oh, like what? Tell me more.
Well, take AI, for example. Researchers just a few years ago, in 2020, used Newton's theories to make better algorithms for machine learning.
Hold on, machine learning. The stuff that's behind things like self-driving cars and facial recognition, that's based on ideas from the 1600s.
Yeah, in a way. His work on calculus and understanding how things move and the forces behind that have been really important for AI. It's like he built the base and we're still adding to it all these years later.
Wow, that's pretty incredible. It's like his ideas just keep giving. Speaking of giving, I've heard that Newton was kind of a loner. He spent years in his study, not really going out. Was he just a solitary genius, or was there more to it?
Newton was definitely a complicated person, and people have talked a lot about his personality. Some think that maybe he had Asperger's syndrome. That might explain why he wasn't great socially and why he was so focused on his work.
You know what? That actually makes a lot of sense. It's like he had this amazing ability to focus on his research. He could just shut out everything else and think about these complicated problems.
Yeah, exactly. And while being a loner might have made his personal life harder, it also let him make amazing discoveries that he might not have made if he was working with others all the time. Sometimes you need that space to really think differently and challenge what everyone thinks.
So maybe being alone was both good and bad for him. It helped him be creative, but it also made him lonely.
Yeah, it's an interesting thought, isn't it? It shows how genius and mental health are connected in a complex way. I mean, Newton's life is a good reminder that even the smartest people are still human.
That's a good point for all of us, really. We tend to think of geniuses as almost superhuman, but they have problems, make mistakes, and have flaws just like all of us.
I agree, and I think realizing that they're human too makes their accomplishments even more impressive. Newton wasn't just some brain in a jar. He was a real person who had his own issues, had doubts, and wasn't always sure of things, and yet he still managed to change how we understand the universe.
So it's like his story is even more inspiring when you see the whole picture.
Exactly. And speaking of seeing the whole picture, let's talk about Newton's interests outside of traditional science. He was really into alchemy, which is like the early version of chemistry.
Alchemy, you mean like turning lead into gold? I thought that was just a myth.
A lot of smart people back then were into alchemy. And yeah, it might seem weird for a scientist to be into it, but back then, science and mysticism weren't so separate.
So he wasn't trying to be some kind of magician, right? He was looking at it scientifically.
Yeah, I think in his own way, yes. He saw alchemy as a way to understand the hidden parts of matter and the secrets of nature. And while he never figured out how to turn lead into gold, his experiments with metals and chemical reactions actually helped pave the way for modern chemistry.
So even his unscientific interests had a big impact. It's like everything he did, even the stuff that didn't work out, contributed to science in the end.
Exactly. And, his interest in alchemy tells us something about how he thought. He wasn't afraid to go against what everyone thought or try out ideas that were considered strange. He was always trying to learn more and find new connections.
Yeah, it was that curiosity and his willingness to think differently that really made him special. He didn't just accept what he was told. He wanted to dig deep and understand the why behind everything.
Right, that constant need to know more, that commitment to asking questions and exploring, that's one of the most important lessons we can learn from Newton's life.
Yeah, it shows us that true genius isn't just about being smart, but also about having the courage to question what you're told, to think differently, and to never stop asking questions.
Exactly. When we embrace that curiosity and try to learn and understand, we open ourselves up to so many possibilities, just like Newton did centuries ago.
Well, we've gone through his amazing discoveries, his complicated personality, and even his adventures in alchemy. It's amazing how much his life still matters today.
His legacy shows just how powerful human curiosity can be and the effect one person can have on history.
This has been an incredible journey so far, but there's still more to explore. When we come back, we'll talk about some of the things we can learn from Newton's life and see how his work still shapes our understanding of the universe today. Welcome back to our final look into the life of Sir Isaac Newton. We've learned so much about him, the science, his ambition, the rivalries, even his experiments with alchemy. It's really inspiring, even with his quirks. His story is so motivating. He really shows us what it means to think big.
Yeah, you're right. I think one of the biggest lessons we can take from Newton is that giving up is not an option. He had a lot of challenges, tough childhood, intense competition, times of real isolation, even a nervous breakdown. But he never stopped searching for knowledge.
He really was the ultimate never-give-up guy. Makes you wonder if those tough times actually made him even more determined. Maybe he wouldn't have done such incredible things if he didn't have to fight so hard.
That's a really interesting idea. Sometimes hard times make us find strength we didn't know we had. Newton's life really shows how powerful it is to be resilient. It shows that even big setbacks don't have to stop us.
Yeah, it reminds us that those failures we all have are just a part of the journey.
Mm.
But it wasn't just about never giving up, right? There's also that constant curiosity, always asking why.
Oh, absolutely. Newton wasn't the kind of guy to just see the world and move on. He wanted to understand how things worked, the reasons behind everything. Remember that moment with the apple? Most of us would have just taken a bite. But he saw a chance to figure out something huge about the universe.
He turned something we see every day into a massive scientific discovery. That's what I find so cool about him. It shows that inspiration is everywhere, even in the simplest things, as long as we're curious enough to really look.
Right, and that's where Newton's ability to focus comes in. He was known for spending hours, days even, lost in his work, like shutting out the world to dive deep into his research.
It makes you wonder what he'd think of our world today. Always online, distractions everywhere. Do you think he'd be overwhelmed? Or would he just find a quiet cabin to escape it all?
It's hard to say. Maybe all the information would be too much for him. But then again, imagine the possibilities. With the internet, computers, and scientists all over the world to work with, who knows what he could have accomplished?
That's amazing to think about. Maybe the real lesson is that we can all learn from how he worked. We don't have to be solving the mysteries of the universe, but we can all try to focus better, tune out the noise, and give our full attention to what we're doing.
Absolutely. With so many distractions around us, being able to focus is so important. It's how we unlock our creativity and become really good at whatever we do. And remember, he didn't do it all alone. He knew he was building on what others had done before him.
It's a great image, right? That progress is a team effort. We all stand on the shoulders of those who came before us.
Exactly. And that shows another important part of Newton's legacy. He shared his knowledge. He inspired others to come after him. He wasn't just happy with his own discoveries, he wanted to pass on the torch so others could see further.
It's like he knew that knowledge is meant to be shared, not kept secret. And by doing that, he changed the world in a way that's still felt today. As we finish up this deep dive, I'm just amazed by all that he did, but also I feel hopeful and inspired.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to put it. Newton's life shows us that the human mind is capable of amazing things. It shows the power of curiosity, persistence, and being willing to challenge how things are.
He showed us that anyone can do great things, even if they're not perfect. So to everyone listening, the next time you're facing a challenge, remember Sir Isaac Newton. Remember the apple, the calculus, the prisms, and the alchemy. Remember to be curious and never give up on learning.
And remember, you don't have to be a genius to make a difference. All you need is the courage to ask why, and the determination to find the answers.
Keep exploring, everyone.